Now, as we see the cost of living going up, and particularly food prices, more and more people are starting to grow their own vegetables. But where do you start? If you've never grown vegetables before, it can seem like a real minefield and you think you need to know so much information. But what I'm going to do in this video is start you off on that journey. I'm going to share with you 10 vegetables that are really easy to grow. Things that you won't have to know an awful lot of information about, that you can just plant and harvest, and hopefully that'll give you the motivation to continue growing vegetables for yourself. If you do like this video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg, don't forget to press the subscribe button. Now, the first easy to grow vegetable is lettuce. There's lots of different varieties of lettuce available. I tend to go for varieties such as Lakeland or all the year round, but there are things like Little Gem, Winter Density, Lola Rossa, whatever your lettuce of choice is. Growing them is pretty much the same, whichever lettuce you choose. They can be grown indoors or outdoors depending upon the time of year. And all you need to do is sprinkle the seeds in a bit of compost, give them a bit of covering, and then just give them a bit of water. If you plant them indoors, you might thin them out, but to make it easy, just plant them in rows outdoors, quite shallow, cover them with a bit of fine compost and water them in, and then they will eventually start to grow. Now, the good thing about growing lettuce is that you can cut lettuce and it will grow back. So some varieties of lettuce are called cut and come again. So when you plant them once, they get to a certain size, you'll cut some leaves off them and they'll continue to grow. So fantastic, easy to grow vegetable to start with is lettuce. Now, if you want a regular supply of lettuce through the spring and summer and even into autumn, all you need to do is plant small amounts every 2 to 3 weeks. If you plant all of the lettuce in one go, you'll probably find you'll have so many that you won't use them. Now, another fantastic and easy to grow vegetable for the first time grower is potatoes. Potatoes are really simple. It's just a case of digging a hole around about 6 inches, which is about the height of my hand trowel here. Use the hand trowel, dig a hole, put the potato in, and then just cover it over and it will look after itself. There's very low maintenance for potato crops. Now, if you do look at growing potatoes, you'll hear terms like first early, second early, main crop, but this video is about being simple. It's about growing potatoes for the first time. And there is a video on my channel which shows you how to grow potatoes from start to finish if you want to find out more information. But go to a store, purchase some seed potatoes, although other potatoes will work, plant them in the ground. Depending upon the time of year, you'll see the green foliage appear through the ground after 4 or 5 weeks. And when that happens, what you want to do is get a rake and just pull the soil up and cover over the green foliage. That's something called trenching. And the reason you'll do that is because some of the potatoes, which are tubers, will grow near the surface, and by trenching them, it stops them being exposed to the sunlight where they'll go green. Let them grow on, and depending upon the variety, they'll be ready to harvest. And to know when they're ready to harvest, you wait for the green foliage to start dying off. When it starts to go yellow, and then it'll eventually die off. So any time from when it starts to go yellow is when you can get a fork and dig them out. Potatoes are fantastic, and they normally give a really high yield, i.e. you'll get plenty of potatoes, and they store well. So if you've got a place that you can store them, they can last a long time. So give potatoes a try. They're quite easy to grow. Another fuss-free crop is peas. Very easy to grow. So as soon as the ground is ready wherever you are in the world, that means that the main winter has passed. You're not having excessive rain and winds, and the ground is dry enough to dig. Then you can plant your pea seeds. One thing that peas will need is some form of support. Here you can see some metal fencing, because when peas grow and when they germinate and they get to a certain size, they will start to attach themselves as they go up. So they'll need some form of support. That could be canes or even netting, but you will need to put something up to allow them to grow upwards. So there's quite a number of varieties of peas available. I always grow something called Calvert and Wonder or Oregon Sugar Pod, which is actually a MANGETOUT, which is from the pea family. And the difference with a MANGETOUT is you'll also eat the casing or the shell. Now, another no-fuss vegetable that you might think about growing for the first time, which is fantastic for roasting and in salads, is beets or beetroot. Now, these are sown directly outside At round about the same time you'd sow the peas that we've just spoken about, they'll go into the ground round about ½ an inch deep, and they will be spaced between 1 to 2 inches apart. The beetroot seeds are little tiny clusters that are easy to handle, so if you plant them at that depth and that distance, you should just be able to leave them. They will need a bit of watering like all the other vegetables, but a very easy and simple crop to grow. So definitely try beets or beetroot. Next we have a very popular vegetable which is easy to grow, which is carrots. Carrots require minimal maintenance. All they require is when you're planting your carrot seeds, they do like the ground to be as fine as possible. So you might need to do a little bit of preparation on the ground just to dig it, because remember that carrots are a root vegetable. They will grow in a downward direction, so any stones that are in the way are going to interrupt their path. So a little tiny bit of preparation on the soil before you put your seeds in. Plant your seeds very, very thinly, cover them with compost, and then water them. You can thin them out if you want to, which means that when they get to a certain height, you can gently lift them and then just separate them out and replant them just to give them a bit more space. Because we're talking about a beginner's video here, I would just advise you just to plant them as thinly as you can at the time you put them in, and then let them grow and then get ready to harvest when they're ready. Now, something I've always found really easy to grow and produced a fantastic harvest every time is courgette or zucchini. Now, these will need to be planted indoor first, so you will need to put these in pots, but when you open your seed packet, you'll see the seeds are quite large. So what you want to do is put one seed per pot. Sow the seed to a depth of about 15 centimetres and then cover it with compost and water it and leave it inside. It will need a little bit of a warmer temperature compared to some of the other vegetables that we've just spoken about that will go straight outside. Then what you want to do is leave them in the pots until they've got about 4 or 5 leaves on them, which are called true leaves. And when they're about this size, around about this size here, with about 4 or 5 leaves, then they can go straight outside. Now when they go outside, they need to be planted round about 2 to 3 feet apart, because what you'll find with zucchini or courgettes is they take up a lot of space. But when they start to flower, that's when you'll start to see your courgettes or your zucchini starting to develop. And what you'll find with them is, unless you cut them off every 2 to 3 days, before you know it, they'll almost be the size of marrows. They grow very, very fast. So definitely give courgettes a try. The only difference with the seeds that we've just looked at is they will need to be started indoors, because they do need a little bit of a warmer temperature, but they are an easy vegetable to grow. Now, something else that's fantastic for the first time grower that requires little maintenance is beans. And there's lots of different varieties of beans available. There's runner beans, broad beans, French beans, and you will need to check the variety to see whether they're a climbing bean or they're just a bush bean or they need any support. So depending upon what bean variety you grow will depend upon whether a tall growing bean or a low level bean. And why do you need to know that? Because if they're a climbing bean, then you will need to provide some support for them, like we just explained for the peas. But the lower growing beans won't require any support at all. Now, they're very easy to grow. Then if you can see on the camera, that's a broad bean seed, so quite large. In fact, these are broad bean plants behind me. So these were planted straight into the ground and covered with compost, and then they were left. They will grow in cold temperatures, but when you come to grow things like French beans and runner beans, you want to try and select a sunny position. Because there are so many different varieties of beans available, you will need to check the instructions on the packet to find out how to sow them and what type of position they like, because they vary quite significantly. But once they're planted and you understand whether they're a climbing bean or a bush bean, they are really low maintenance. And the good news as well is they produce a really high yield crop, which means you get a lot of vegetables from each plant. Now, an extremely popular vegetable that you might use a lot of that's very low maintenance is onions. But if you are going to grow onions, don't try growing onions from seed. They're a little bit more complicated. Start off using something called onion sets. Now, onion sets are little bulbs that you buy. I'll just come closer to the camera and show you an onion set. It's got a pointy bit at the top, and at the bottom is where the roots will grow. So all you've got to do to grow the onions is just prepare the ground so it's nice and fine, and then put the onion set in with the root bit at the bottom and push them in just below the surface. They don't need to go too deep at all. And literally that's as much as you'll need to do with these onion sets. You'll know they're ready to harvest when they start to fall over, but what you will see is they'll start to bulb up and get bigger before they're ready. But onion sets are definitely something that you might want to try. You can get red onions or white onions. There's quite a lot of varieties out there. Now, out of everything that you would grow in the vegetable patch, I'd probably say that rhubarb is the easiest. Rhubarb is a perennial, which means it grows every year. It dies back in late autumn and winter, and then will start to rejuvenate again. As you can see here, it's just starting to grow in the early spring. I've got 12 rhubarb plants on my plot here, and I harvest an awful lot of rhubarb. But in terms of maintenance, it requires very little. In the winter, all I need to do, and I'll do this in the next couple of weeks, is just give it a bit of a weeding, and then literally I'll get a load of rhubarb off that. There's honestly nothing to do to rhubarb whatsoever apart from make sure it is watered. And when you are watering rhubarb, just one tip, make sure you take off the top of your watering can and water straight down to the roots. But if you do that, you'll start to get plenty of rhubarb. Very easy to grow. When you buy these in something called crowns, so they won't be seeds. They'll be like little root tubers, and plant them straight into the ground, cover them over, and then before you know it, you'll have plenty of rhubarb. And finally, it'd be impossible to talk about easy growing vegetables without mentioning radish. Now, depending on the variety, radish are small red and white vegetables that provide a real peppery, zingy type of taste, which are excellent in salads and stir fries. So they're well worth growing. But the good thing about radish is that for some varieties, you can harvest them after 4 to 5 weeks from when you sow them, so they grow very quickly. So the secret with growing radish is if you want a regular supply, just like I mentioned with lettuce at the beginning of the video, is you want to sow small amounts but regularly. So every 2 to 3 weeks, so that you get that regular supply. So for the first time vegetable grower, radish are excellent. Well, I'm really hoping that's give you a bit of encouragement to start you on your journey of growing vegetables. I've tried to keep everything in this video as simple as possible, but definitely try those 10 vegetables, and you may not be successful with all of them, and that's okay. That's what vegetable growing's all about. But you'll have a much better chance of starting with those 10 vegetables rather than trying things that are more complicated. And then when you start to harvest your vegetables and you start to get encouraged, then you can look at more complex things to grow. And of course, whatever you do, make sure you follow the instructions on the seed packet in terms of when to sow them, and it'll give you instructions about the depth and all those type of things. So have a good read of that before you start planting these seeds, and that should help you to be more successful. If you are a new vegetable grower, it'd be fantastic if you could put a comment below and let me know what type of vegetables you're thinking of growing, and also let me know where you are in the world. I'm always interested to see where viewers of the channel come from, so make sure you add that as well. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure you give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button.